the widow cursed by the whole town, now embraced forever by the ranch owner. The town had narrow streets lined with cobblestones, little shops with painted wooden signs, and houses that seemed to lean close to one another, as if whispering stories of generations past. Despite its charm, Meadoridge could be harsh to those who did not fit the expectations of the community, and Eliza had learned this the hardest way. Her home was at the edge of town, a modest cottage with faded blue shutters and a small garden behind it. It was the only part of her life that felt safe and private, away from the judging eyes of her neighbors. After her husband's sudden death, the townspeople had turned their suspicion toward her. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered that she had been careless, others that she had brought misfortune upon herself, and a few, in hushed tones, claimed she had been responsible for her husband's demise. None of it was true, but truth hardly mattered in Meadoridge when fear and superstition took hold. Every morning, Eliza would wake before dawn. The silence of the early hours was comforting. It allowed her to hear the world as it really was. The wind rustling through the trees, the soft cooing of the morning pigeons, the distant lowing of cows from the nearby farms, these sounds were her companions. She tended to her garden carefully, planting flowers and vegetables in neat rows. The earth beneath her fingers was warm and familiar, a grounding presence when the town above seemed cold and distant. Her garden was a private sanctuary, a world where she could nurture life even as sorrow and loneliness surrounded her. But the world outside her garden was less forgiving. At the market, shopkeepers would lower their voices when she approached. "She's the widow, isn't she?" they would whisper. Children would point at her, repeating what they had overheard from their parents. "Stay away from her, she's bad luck." Even strangers visiting the town would glance at her with suspicion, as if her sadness had painted an invisible mark on her skin. Eliza tried to ignore it, but every slight left a scar. Every cold shoulder, every avoided gaze reminded her of her isolation. She missed her husband, Jacob, terribly. They had been young, in love, and full of dreams. His death had left a hole in her life that no amount of distraction or work could fill. Nights were the hardest. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of old wood and the whisper of wind through the shutters. Sometimes she would sit by the window, staring at the moon, and speak aloud to Jacob as if he could hear her. "I'm trying, Jacob, I'm trying to be strong, but it's so hard." Tears would flow quietly down her cheeks, unobserved, unjudged. Even in her solitude, Eliza had a routine. She rose at dawn, worked in the garden, baked bread, and mended her clothes. She would sometimes walk to the town's edge, exchanging a polite nod with a passing neighbor, though more often than not, she would be met with avoidance or scorn. At the bakery, Mrs. Thompson, the elderly shopkeeper, would pretend to be busy when Eliza entered, even though she had clearly seen her waiting outside. The butcher would pretend to measure the meat twice as long before handing it over, making her feel like a burden. Every small act reminded her of the town's judgment. Despite the cruelty of the town, Eliza remained gentle. She never spoke back to the whispers or raised her voice in anger. In fact, she often helped where she could, even when it went unnoticed. A lost child wandering near the forest she guided back home, quietly, without expecting thanks. An elderly neighbor struggling with heavy water buckets she carried to their doorstep. Yet these small acts of kindness were rarely recognized, overshadowed by the lingering suspicion surrounding her name. One chilly morning, as frost still clung to the edges of the garden leaves, Eliza noticed a young girl peering over the fence. The girl's eyes were wide, curious but careful. She held a small basket full of berries and hesitated. Eliza smiled softly, signaling that it was okay to come closer. The girl approached slowly. I picked these for you," she said, her voice barely audible. Eliza's heart lifted in a small, fragile way. "Thank you, dear," she replied warmly. She took the basket and nodded. "These are lovely. You have a good eye." The girl smiled just for a moment and ran off before anyone could see her. It was a tiny act of friendship, but in a world that had turned so cold, it felt monumental. Even as she nurtured life and small friendships, the weight of the town's judgment never left her. At night, she would hear whispers traveling with the wind. Sometimes she imagined them as shadows creeping along her walls, always watching, always waiting to find fault. She had no friends her own age, no family left nearby, and no one to share her deepest thoughts with. Her life was quiet, lonely, and framed by suspicion. Yet she endured, driven by the memory of her husband and the hope that one day, perhaps, someone might see her for who she truly was. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and painted the sky with shades of pink and orange, Eliza sat on the porch with a cup of tea. She watched the smoke from the chimneys curl upward, listened to the distant barking of a dog, and felt the crisp wind against her cheeks. It was in these moments, between the sorrow of her past and the harshness of the town, that she felt a strange sense of calm. Perhaps life would always be difficult. Perhaps the town would never forgive her for the misfortune that had befallen her, but in her heart, she knew that she was still capable of goodness, of love, and of life. As the night grew darker and the stars emerged like tiny pinpricks of hope, Eliza made a quiet promise to herself. She would survive the town's scorn. She would tend her garden, nurture the life around her, and carry forward with the dignity that had not been taken from her, no matter how much others tried to define her. The world may have branded her as cursed, but she refused to believe it. Somewhere beyond the edges of the town, there was life waiting, kindness waiting, and perhaps, in time, someone who would see her as she truly was. The first part of Eliza's journey ends here, a woman surrounded by suspicion and loneliness, yet holding tightly to the small, fragile threads of hope that life still offered her. Though the town had turned its back, the world was larger than Meteridge, and life had a way of bringing unexpected turns. And in the quiet of her garden, Eliza tended not just to plants, but to the seed of her own courage, waiting for the day it would bloom. Life in Meteridge continued its slow rhythm, with the same narrow streets, the same whispering neighbors, and the same cold shoulders waiting. At every turn, Eliza had grown used to the solitude, yet a small part of her still longed for something more, a connection, a kind word, or even just the presence of someone who would see her for who she truly was. She could not have imagined that the change was about to arrive in the form of a stranger, a man who would alter the course of her quiet, lonely days. It happened on a crisp morning when the sun was barely above the horizon, casting soft, golden light across the town. A carriage rumbled down the cobblestone streets, its wheels clattering loudly, announcing the arrival of someone new. The townspeople peered from their windows and doorways, whispering among themselves. "A stranger," they murmured. "Who is he and why does he come here?" Eliza watched from the corner of her garden, curiosity stirring in her chest. She rarely paid attention to new arrivals, but something about this man felt different. The stranger was tall, with strong shoulders and kind eyes that seemed to notice everything around him. He moved with confidence but not arrogance, carrying himself in a way that suggested both wealth and humility. His clothes were finely made, yet he wore them with ease, as though he belonged to the earth as much as to the halls of a mansion. This was Daniel, the ranch owner from the nearby hills, who had come to Meteridge seeking land and workers, but would soon find something far more valuable. Daniel's first encounter with Eliza was accidental yet unforgettable. As he explored the town, he noticed her garden, the neat rows of flowers and vegetables, and the quiet diligence with which she worked. Unlike the townspeople, he did not whisper or avert his gaze. Instead, he paused, watching with genuine interest. There was a calm strength in her movements, a careful attention to detail, and a softness in the way she tended the earth. It intrigued him. Eliza noticed him staring and felt a twinge of nervousness. She had grown so accustomed to suspicion and judgment that the idea of someone looking at her without prejudice was almost unsettling. Yet there was something in his gaze that made her heart feel lighter, a gentle warmth that contrasted sharply with the coldness she had grown used to. She nodded politely, unsure what else to do, and returned to her work. The next day, Daniel returned. This time he carried a small basket filled with fresh bread and fruit from his travels. "Good morning," he said warmly, holding out the basket. "I thought you might enjoy this." Eliza blinked, surprised by the kindness. No one had ever brought her anything without expecting something in return. Hesitant, she accepted the basket. "Thank you," she said softly. "That is very thoughtful of you." Over the following days, Daniel continued to visit the garden. He did not intrude or demand attention. He simply observed, occasionally offering gentle advice on planting or sharing stories of the land he had worked. Slowly, Eliza began to feel a small flicker of trust. She found herself looking forward to these visits, curious about the man who saw her not as a cursed widow, but as a person capable of skill, care, and life. Their conversation started quietly, often about simple things, the weather, the growth of the plants, or the animals Daniel raised on his ranch. Yet in those quiet moments, a bond began to form. Daniel admired her resilience, noticing how she carried her grief without bitterness, how she continued to nurture life even when the town had turned its back on her. Eliza, in turn, found comfort in his presence, his steady voice, and the genuine interest he took in her thoughts and feelings. One afternoon, Daniel invited her to walk along the outskirts of the town, near the fields and pastures he had come to inspect. Hesitant at first, Eliza eventually agreed. As they walked side by side, the wind blowing softly through the grass, she felt a freedom she had not experienced in years. The town's judgment seemed distant here, replaced by the gentle rhythm of the earth and the sound of Daniel's voice recounting stories of life on the ranch. He spoke of his early days, how he had learned to care for animals, the joy of seeing a seed grow into a thriving plant, and the satisfaction of working the land with one's own hands. Eliza listened, intrigued not only by his experiences, but by the way he spoke with respect for all living things. There was a gentleness in his words that soothed the ache in her heart, a reminder that kindness still existed in the world. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel's visits became a part of Eliza's life. He helped her with heavier tasks in the garden, carried water when the wells ran low, and even repaired a section of her fence that had been damaged in a storm. In return, Eliza taught him how to tend plants with care, how to read the signs of the soil, and the small joys of nurturing life from seed to harvest. Through these shared tasks, a partnership began to bloom, built not on necessity but on mutual respect and understanding. Yet even as their bond grew, the town's whispers did not stop. Some villagers noticed Daniel's attention toward Eliza and disapproved. "Why does he spend so much time with her?" they murmured. "Isn't he aware of the curse that follows her?" But Daniel did not waver. He had seen the truth, that Eliza was not cursed but misunderstood. He admired her strength, her gentleness, and her ability to care even when the world had turned against her. Eliza, for her part, was cautious. She had been hurt before and knew the sting of betrayal all too well. But with Daniel there was no pretense, no hidden agenda. He never judged her for her past, never made her feel ashamed for the grief she carried. Slowly, she allowed herself to believe that not everyone would treat her as the town had. That kindness could exist even in a place filled with suspicion. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of amber and gold, Daniel brought a small gift, a notebook and a set of pens. "I thought you might like to write," he said, smiling. "Perhaps putting your thoughts on paper will bring you peace." Eliza was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. She had rarely written since her husband's death, believing that words could not capture the depth of her sorrow. But as she held the notebook, she felt a spark of possibility, a small, fragile hope that her story could continue and that someone would listen. From that moment, writing became part of her routine. She poured her thoughts, memories, and dreams into the pages, and Daniel would read excerpts when invited, offering gentle encouragement. Through their conversations, walks, and shared work, a quiet friendship blossomed into something deeper. For the first time in years, Eliza felt seen, valued, and understood, not as the widow cursed by the town, but as a person of strength, kindness, and heart. The change in her life did not happen all at once. There were still moments when the town's judgment stung, when whispers followed her through the market, and when isolation seemed inevitable. But Daniel's presence created a buffer, a safe space where she could breathe, think, and grow without fear. He reminded her that the world was bigger than Meadoridge, and that life could bring unexpected kindness, even after the harshest sorrows. As winter approached, Daniel invited Eliza to visit his ranch, a vast expanse of green fields, rolling hills, and stables filled with animals. She hesitated, unsure if she was ready to step into a world so different from the quiet town she had known. But Daniel's encouragement was gentle, patient, never pushing, always offering. "There is nothing to fear," he said. "I want to share this with you if you wish to come." That small invitation, given with genuine respect and care, opened a new door for Eliza. The day she finally agreed to visit the ranch, the air was crisp and fresh. As she stepped onto the property, she was greeted by the soft sounds of animals, the rustle of trees, and the open expanse of land stretching into the distance. It was unlike anything she had known, peaceful, alive, and full of possibility. Daniel guided her through the fields, introducing her to the animals, showing her the barns, and explaining the rhythms of life on the ranch. She felt a sense of freedom here, a release from the weight of the town's whispers. By the end of the day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Eliza realized something she had not felt in a long time: hope. She had been carrying grief and suspicion for months, even years, but now, with Daniel's friendship and kindness, she felt the first stirrings of something new. Life, she realized, could still be beautiful even after loss. The world could still offer connection, understanding, and love. And perhaps, just perhaps, she was ready to embrace it. The days that followed Daniel's invitation to the ranch became some of the happiest Eliza had experienced in years. Each visit was an escape from the shadows of Meadoridge, a chance to breathe freely and simply exist without judgment. She discovered the rhythms of ranch life. The early mornings, the gentle clatter of hooves against the barn floor, the smell of hay and earth after rain, and the quiet satisfaction of completing hard work under the open sky. Daniel guided her patiently, never rushing her, never expecting more than she could give. At first, Eliza was cautious. The town's whispers and suspicion had shaped her world so completely that she still braced for disapproval, even in this new, open place. But Daniel's consistent kindness and respect began to erode that caution. He spoke to her as an equal, valuing her opinions, listening to her thoughts, and always noticing the effort she put into everything she did. For the first time, she felt that her voice mattered. Daniel taught her how to care for the animals, showing her how to feed the horses, tend to the chickens, and check on the cows in the pasture. Eliza, in turn, shared her knowledge of plants and soil, teaching him how to cultivate gardens with patience and care. Together, they worked side by side, often laughing over small mistakes or celebrating small successes. It was in these shared moments that the foundation of trust and friendship deepened, slowly turning into something far more meaningful. One afternoon, while repairing a broken fence at the edge of the ranch, Eliza spoke of her life before Meadoridge. She told Daniel about her childhood, her dreams with Jacob, and the hopes she had carried into marriage. Her voice trembled slightly as she recounted the day of her husband's death, the shock and grief that followed, and the way the town had turned against her. Daniel listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. When she finished, he simply said, "I am sorry you had to endure that, but I see your strength, Eliza, and I see your heart. Do not let the world tell you who you are." Those words lingered in her mind long after she left the ranch that day. For so long, she had been defined by the town's whispers, forced into the shadow of suspicion. Yet Daniel's belief in her goodness created a space where she could finally see herself through a different lens, a lens of strength, resilience, and kindness. Slowly, she began to believe in the possibility of happiness again. As the weeks passed, their bond grew stronger. They spent long hours walking through the fields, talking about dreams, hopes, and even small fears. Daniel shared stories of his childhood on the ranch, of lessons learned from hard work and care for the land. Eliza shared stories of her marriage, her grief, and the quiet joys she had discovered in her garden. Through these exchanges, they discovered a mutual understanding, a connection that went beyond words. Despite their growing closeness, the town remained a source of tension. Rumors about Daniel's attention toward Eliza reached the ears of those who still feared her supposed curse. Some whispered that Daniel had been bewitched by her, while others claimed he would regret getting involved with a woman marked by misfortune. Eliza heard the whispers, but for the first time, they no longer controlled her. Daniel's presence was a reminder that not everyone would believe in the town's prejudices, that some people could see the truth beyond fear and superstition. One chilly morning, Daniel asked Eliza to help him with a new project on the ranch. A section of the land had been overgrown, and he wanted her insight on how best to cultivate it. Eliza hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready to take on a challenge so visible. But Daniel's encouraging smile gave her courage. "I trust your judgment," he said. "You have a gift for seeing what others cannot." With that simple statement, she agreed, and together they spent the day clearing the land, planting new crops, and restoring the soil. The work was hard, but it was also deeply satisfying, a tangible reminder that their combined efforts could bring life and growth where once there was neglect. During their breaks, they would sit under the shade of an old oak tree, sharing simple meals and quiet conversations. Daniel would often tease her gently, making her laugh in a way she had not in years. In those moments, the shadows of her past seemed to fade, replaced by warmth, laughter, and a sense of possibility. She began to look forward to these moments, to the companionship, and the quiet understanding that had grown between them. Evenings at the ranch became another source of comfort. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over the fields, Eliza and Daniel would sit together on the porch, watching the animals settle for the night and listening to the wind through the trees. It was peaceful, almost magical, a stark contrast to the cold suspicion that had haunted her in Meadoridge. Here, she felt safe, valued, and truly seen. Yet life was not without its challenges. One day, while returning from the town market, Eliza overheard a group of villagers speaking in harsh tones. "She thinks she can escape her fate," one said. "Now the ranch owner is foolish enough to trust her. Mark my words, she will bring trouble." The words stung, but for the first time they did not bring despair. Eliza realized that she could not control the town's opinions, but she could control her own actions, her own heart. She had Daniel, she had the ranch, and she had a life worth living. As winter drew closer, Daniel invited Eliza to spend a night at the ranch. It was a gesture of trust and companionship, and though she was nervous, she accepted. That evening, as they shared a simple meal by the fireplace, Eliza felt a sense of belonging she had not known in years. The warmth of the fire, the sound of Daniel's calm voice, and the quiet presence of the animals nearby created a cocoon of safety and comfort. She realized that she had found not just a friend, but someone who respected her, valued her, and could walk beside her through life's hardships. During that night, they spoke of dreams for the future. Daniel shared his plans for expanding the ranch, for creating a place where people could work together and care for the land responsibly. Eliza shared her hopes for a garden that could feed not just herself, but the community, a vision of nurturing life in every sense. Their dreams intertwined naturally, each inspired by the other's passion and dedication. In the weeks that followed, their bond only deepened. They worked together on the ranch, shared quiet walks, and continued to support each other in ways both big and small. Eliza began to notice a change within herself, a newfound confidence, a belief in her own worth, and a recognition that she was capable of love and joy once again. The town's whispers still reached her ears, but they no longer held the power to define her life. She had found someone who believed in her, and that belief was stronger than any rumor or prejudice. One particularly cold morning, Daniel brought her a warm blanket and a thermos of tea as she worked in the garden. "You've done so much here," he said softly. "I wanted to make sure you were comfortable while you continue your work." Eliza smiled, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. It was not just the blanket or the tea, but the consistent care he showed, the way he noticed her needs without making her feel weak or dependent. Through these acts, Daniel taught Eliza something she had almost forgotten, that trust and friendship could be gentle, consistent, and life-affirming. He showed her that someone could care deeply without judgment, that kindness was a force capable of healing even the deepest wounds. And slowly, Eliza allowed herself to hope, not just for happiness, but for love, partnership, and a future where she could be fully herself. As the part of winter approached, Daniel invited Eliza to help plan the spring planting on the ranch. It was a project that would require cooperation, creativity, and patience. Together, they measured fields, selected seeds, and created a plan that combined their skills and knowledge. The work was demanding, but it strengthened their connection. They learned to anticipate each other's movements, to communicate without words, and to trust in one another's judgment. Through it all, Eliza's heart began to open. She realized that life could still be beautiful, that companionship could be healing, and that the world could offer opportunities for connection even after loss. Daniel had become more than a friend. He was a partner in every sense, someone who saw her not as a widow cursed by misfortune, but as a woman of strength, kindness, and resilience. By the end of this part of her journey, Eliza understood that her life was no longer defined solely by grief or the town's whispers. She had found a sanctuary in the ranch, a safe place where her talents, kindness, and heart were recognized and valued. And most importantly, she had found someone who believed in her, someone willing to walk beside her through every challenge and triumph that lay ahead. The bond between Eliza and Daniel had become unshakable, built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. It was a bond that could withstand the judgment of the town, the hardships of life, and the shadows of the past. And as she stood in the fields beside him, watching the animals roam freely and feeling the wind on her face, Eliza realized that her life was changing, not because of luck or chance, but because she had allowed herself to trust, to hope, and to embrace the possibility of happiness once again. Winter had passed, leaving behind the soft freshness of early spring. The town of Meadoridge began to bloom with color, as flowers emerged from the cold earth and the trees regained their green leaves. But for Eliza, the changing season did not bring complete peace. The whispers of the townspeople, though quieter than before, still lingered. Their suspicion, though sometimes hidden behind polite faces, was never far from her mind. She had grown stronger, thanks to Daniel, yet the shadow of the town's judgment remained a presence she could not ignore. It was a warm morning when trouble arrived in an unexpected form. A severe storm had swept through the region the night before, leaving fallen branches, flooded fields, and damaged roofs in its wake. Eliza emerged from her cottage to assess the damage in her garden. The plants she had carefully nurtured were flattened, some washed away by the heavy rain, and the small fence she had built had collapsed in one corner. She sighed, her heart sinking, yet she refused to succumb to despair. She began to clear debris, determined to restore her garden despite the setback. Word of the storm quickly reached the townspeople. Instead of offering help or support, a group of villagers decided to confront Eliza. They accused her of bringing misfortune to the town, claiming that the storm was a result of the so-called curse that followed her. Their voices were loud, sharp with anger and fear, and they demanded that she leave her home. For the first time, Eliza felt a twinge of panic. The walls she had built to protect herself seemed to shake under the weight of their accusations. Daniel arrived just in time. Seeing the crowd surrounding her, he stepped forward, his tall figure casting a protective shadow. "Enough," he said firmly. His voice carried authority, calm but unyielding. "She is not responsible for the storm or any misfortune that may occur. You have no right to accuse her." The villagers hesitated, surprised by his boldness. Daniel had always been respected in the town for his wealth and knowledge, but no one had ever seen him speak so directly to defend another person. Eliza felt a mix of gratitude and fear. She had grown used to facing the town alone, but now, with Daniel by her side, she realized she did not have to. She watched as he calmly helped to explain the situation to the townspeople, pointing out that storms were a natural occurrence, not a sign of supernatural punishment. Slowly, the anger in the villagers' eyes began to soften, though some still lingered with suspicion. Over the following days, Daniel worked alongside Eliza to repair her garden and her small fence. He brought extra supplies from his ranch, carried heavy soil, and even helped replant the vegetables that had been washed away. Eliza, though hesitant at first, allowed herself to accept his help, realizing that there was strength in partnership. Together, they transformed the wreckage into a renewed space, a symbol of resilience and determination. The process was not easy. There were long hours of hard labor, moments of frustration when plants did not take root, and the constant reminder of the town's judgment lurking at the edges. But Daniel never wavered in his support. He encouraged her when she felt overwhelmed, praised her efforts when they succeeded, and shared quiet moments of laughter when mistakes were made. Through this shared struggle, their bond grew even stronger, founded not only on affection but also on mutual respect and trust. As the work continued, some townspeople began to observe their efforts. Slowly, perceptions began to shift. Those who had once whispered accusations started to see Eliza differently. They noticed her patience, her resilience, and the genuine partnership she shared with Daniel. Some were still hesitant, still wary of what they did not understand, but the change was beginning. Actions spoke louder than words, and Eliza's deeds, supported by Daniel's steady presence, were difficult to ignore. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, Daniel suggested they take a walk beyond the garden. They wandered through the open fields, the soft grass brushing against their ankles, and the air fresh with the scent of new growth. Daniel spoke of his dreams for the ranch, of creating a place where people could work together, care for the land, and support one another. Eliza shared her vision of a garden that could not only feed her, but also provide for those in need, a small act of generosity to balance the hardships she had endured. As they walked, Daniel paused and looked at her with a serious expression. "Eliza," he said softly, "I have never met anyone as strong and compassionate as you. You have endured so much, yet you continue to care, to nurture, and to hope. I want you to know that I believe in you completely." No one's words, no one's fears can change that. Eliza felt a warmth spread through her chest. For so long, she had been defined by the town's whispers and judgments. Now she realized that her worth was not determined by them, but by the strength she carried within herself and the belief of someone who truly saw her. As spring turned to early summer, life at the ranch and in Eliza's garden began to flourish. Together, Daniel and Eliza organized the fields, planted new crops, and tended to the animals with care and dedication. Their days were long and sometimes exhausting, but filled with purpose and satisfaction. The partnership they shared went beyond friendship. It was a bond of trust, mutual support, and shared dreams. However, the town's opposition did not vanish entirely. Occasionally, someone would mutter a comment about Eliza's past or question why Daniel continued to support her. But Daniel's unwavering belief in her created a buffer against these attacks. With him by her side, Eliza felt empowered to face the town's lingering prejudice. She began to speak up when necessary, showing patience and courage rather than fear. Slowly, she realized that the judgments of others could no longer control her life. One particularly challenging day, a neighbor approached with news that the town council was considering stricter regulations on her property, citing outdated rules and vague complaints. The thought of losing her home or being forced to give up her garden was frightening, yet Eliza did not panic. Daniel stood beside her, calmly explaining their rights, helping her prepare a response, and ensuring that their voices would be heard. Together, they attended a council meeting, presenting a case not of defiance, but of reason, respect, and evidence of her positive contributions to the community. The council listened, some with skepticism, others with curiosity. Eliza spoke with clarity and composure, explaining the care she had put into her garden, the benefits it provided, and her willingness to collaborate with the town for the greater good. Daniel supported her calmly, offering facts and observations that reinforced her words. By the end of the meeting, the council members were convinced of her integrity and dedication. Though a few remained cautious, the decision was in her favor. Her garden and property were safe, and she was recognized for her hard work and positive impact. This victory marked a turning point in Eliza's life. She realized that while the town's judgment had once seemed unshakable, perseverance, truth, and support could change even the most stubborn opinions. Her confidence grew, and she began to see herself not as a widow defined by misfortune, but as a capable, valued, and respected member of the community. Daniel's presence had been a guiding light, but her own courage and dedication had carried her through the challenges. With the garden restored and their bond stronger than ever, Daniel and Eliza began to dream of the future. They talked of expanding the ranch, creating spaces for community gatherings, and establishing programs to teach others about sustainable gardening and animal care. These plans brought a sense of purpose and excitement to their lives, replacing the fear and suspicion that had once dominated Eliza's days. Even the town began to change. Slowly, people who had once avoided or whispered about Eliza started to approach her, seeking advice for their own gardens or sharing small acts of kindness. While not everyone was fully convinced, the shift was undeniable. Eliza had transformed from a figure of suspicion into a person of respect and admiration. And through it all, Daniel's steady support remained constant, a reminder that belief in one another could overcome even the harshest opposition. As summer approached in full bloom, Eliza stood in her garden, surrounded by the fruits of her labor. The flowers blossomed, the vegetables thrived, and the small fence stood strong, a symbol of resilience and care. Daniel joined her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've done this," he said softly, "all of it. And you've shown everyone that strength, patience, and kindness can change the world around you." Eliza smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride and peace. She realized that her journey had been long and difficult, but it had also been transformative. For the first time in years, she felt fully alive, fully seen, and fully capable of embracing the life that awaited her. The town's judgment no longer held her captive, and the future, once uncertain and frightening, now shimmered with possibility. With Daniel by her side, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they could face them together, with courage, compassion, and unwavering support. And so, Eliza's life entered a new chapter, one defined not by grief, suspicion, or isolation, but by strength, partnership, and the quiet triumph of perseverance and hope. The storm had tested her, the town had challenged her, but in the end she had emerged stronger, surrounded by life, love, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Summer had arrived in Meadowridge, and the town glowed with warmth, color, and life. The streets were lively, filled with children running, neighbors greeting each other, and the gentle hum of everyday activity. Yet, for Eliza, this summer felt different. It was not just the change in season, but the transformation in her life. She no longer walked in fear of the town's whispers. She no longer felt the heavy weight of isolation pressing down on her shoulders. Instead, she walked with confidence, supported by Daniel, and embraced by a new sense of purpose and hope. The garden behind her cottage had flourished. The vegetables were ripe, the flowers bloomed in vibrant colors, and the fence, once fragile and broken, now stood strong, a testament to her perseverance and care. Each morning, as she tended to her plants, she felt a deep satisfaction. The garden was more than just a place to grow food. It was a symbol of her strength, her resilience, and her ability to nurture life despite the hardships she had endured. It was also a place where she had found herself again, where she had learned to trust, to hope, and to believe in the possibility of happiness. Daniel continued to visit regularly, often joining her in the garden or guiding her through the ranch. Their relationship had grown steadily, rooted in trust, shared experiences, and deep understanding. They laughed together, worked together, and shared dreams for the future. Daniel's admiration for Eliza had never wavered. He had seen her strength, her kindness, and her courage long before anyone else had. Eliza, in turn, had come to rely on his support, his patience, and his unwavering belief in her. Together, they had built a partnership that was equal, respectful, and full of love. One afternoon, Daniel proposed a small celebration to mark the success of the garden and their joint efforts at the ranch. He invited a few townspeople who had slowly begun to recognize Eliza's true character. Some had once whispered, some had avoided her entirely, but they were now curious to see the woman who had endured so much and yet emerged stronger. Eliza hesitated at first, feeling the lingering sting of old judgments, but Daniel's encouragement was gentle. "Let them see who you are," he said, "not as they think you are, but as you truly are." The gathering was simple but warm. Tables were set in the garden, filled with fresh fruits, vegetables, and baked goods. The townspeople arrived cautiously, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and tentative respect. Eliza welcomed each of them with calm dignity, offering smiles, small talk, and the fruits of her labor. As the afternoon unfolded, the atmosphere softened. Children played freely among the flowers, neighbors exchanged kind words, and laughter began to replace the old whispers of suspicion. During the celebration, Daniel stood beside Eliza and spoke to the gathering. "This garden," he said, "is not just a place of plants, but a place of care, dedication, and community. Eliza has nurtured it with patience and love. She has shown us all that strength and goodness can shine even in the face of adversity." His words were sincere, clear, and heartfelt. The townspeople listened, and slowly their expressions changed. Some nodded in acknowledgement, some offered smiles, and a few even approached Eliza to apologize for their past judgments. Eliza felt a mixture of relief and gratitude. For so long, she had been defined by grief and suspicion, yet here she was, surrounded by the fruits of her efforts and the recognition of those who had once doubted her. The garden, the work, and Daniel's unwavering support had created a bridge from isolation to acceptance. She realized that the town's transformation had mirrored her own, from suspicion to understanding, from fear to respect. As the celebration continued, Daniel took Eliza's hand gently. "You've earned this," he said softly. "Not just the garden, but the respect, the friendship, and the life you deserve. You've shown courage, kindness, and patience, and through it all, You've remained true to yourself." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel fully recognized, fully valued, and fully loved. Even as the town slowly embraced her, Daniel's role in her life became even more significant. He invited her to spend more time at the ranch, helping with projects, planning future expansions, and even caring for the animals in a deeper way. The days were long and filled with work, yet each task was meaningful. They built new fences, repaired barns, and planted additional crops. Eliza's confidence grew with each accomplishment, and the townspeople who observed her efforts began to see her as a person of resilience, dedication, and integrity. One quiet evening after a long day of work, Daniel and Eliza sat together under the vast sky. The sun had just set, casting golden and pink hues across the fields. Daniel turned to her, his eyes full of warmth and admiration. "Eliza," he said, "I have watched you endure so much, yet you have never lost your heart, your courage, or your kindness. I want to spend my life with you, not because of what others think, but because of who you are. Will you be with me?" Eliza felt a wave of emotion, a mixture of joy, relief, and love. For so long she had been alone, misunderstood, and judged. But now, standing beside someone who saw her true worth, she felt a sense of completeness she had never known. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with happiness. "I will." Their union was not grand or ostentatious, but it was perfect in its sincerity. The ceremony took place in the garden where Eliza had spent countless hours nurturing life, surrounded by flowers, vegetables, and the people who had come to respect and appreciate her. Daniel stood by her side, steady and kind, while the townspeople watched with smiles, some in quiet admiration, others in newfound understanding. It was a celebration of resilience, love, and the triumph of kindness over suspicion. After their union, life settled into a peaceful and joyful rhythm. Eliza continued to tend her garden, now with Daniel by her side, sharing tasks, laughter, and dreams. The ranch flourished under their combined care, providing food, shelter, and work for those willing to help. The town, once suspicious and judgmental, now recognized Eliza as a valued member of the community, a woman of strength, compassion, and perseverance. Children who had once whispered and pointed now ran to her for advice on planting flowers or caring for small animals. Neighbors sought her guidance in gardens and daily life. The old whispers of curses and misfortune were replaced with stories of her courage, resilience, and generosity. Eliza had not only restored her own life, but had inspired a subtle transformation in the town itself. Evenings were often spent together at the ranch, sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields, or walking hand in hand through the garden. They talked of dreams for the future, expanding the ranch, creating spaces for education about gardening and animal care, and finding ways to support the community. Their life together was filled with purpose, love, and mutual respect. Eliza sometimes reflected on the years of isolation and suspicion she had endured. She thought about the grief of losing her husband, the harsh whispers of the townspeople, and the long days spent in solitude. But she also realized that those experiences had shaped her into the strong, compassionate, and resilient woman she had become. Without those trials, she might not have recognized the depth of her own strength or the value of someone who truly believed in her. Daniel remained her constant support, never judging, never rushing, always encouraging. He celebrated her successes, comforted her in moments of doubt, and reminded her daily of her worth. Through him, Eliza learned that love could be gentle, steady, and unwavering, a force that could heal wounds, nurture growth, and bring joy even after years of sorrow. Over time, the town's acceptance of Eliza grew stronger. She no longer felt the sting of suspicion or judgment. The people of Meadowridge had come to see her not as a widow cursed by misfortune, but as a woman of courage, kindness, and heart. She had transformed not only her own life, but had left a lasting impression on the community, a reminder that resilience, patience, and goodness could change hearts and minds. As the story of her life unfolded, Eliza realized that she had finally found a place where she belonged. She had a loving partner in Daniel, a thriving garden, a flourishing ranch, and a community that had learned to appreciate her true character. The loneliness that had once defined her existence had been replaced with companionship, purpose, and love. One golden evening, as they stood together in the garden, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Daniel took Eliza's hand and smiled. "We've come a long way," he said, "from shadows of suspicion to the light of what we've built together. And this is only the beginning." Eliza nodded, her heart full. She had faced grief, judgment, and hardship, yet she had emerged stronger, surrounded by love, respect, and the promise of a bright future. In that moment, she understood the true meaning of life, resilience, and partnership. She had been cursed in the eyes of the town, shunned and misunderstood, yet she had found someone who saw her worth, a place to nurture life, and a community that now embraced her. The past no longer held her captive. The whispers of fear had been replaced with songs of respect and admiration. Her life, once shadowed by sorrow, now shone with love, acceptance, and endless possibility. Eliza and Daniel stood together, hand in hand, looking out over the garden, the ranch, and the fields that stretched beyond. The journey had been long, filled with challenges, heartache, and uncertainty, yet it had also been filled with growth, discovery, and the power of human connection. Together, they had built a life of purpose, trust, and love, proof that even after the darkest storms, the sun could shine brighter than ever. And so, Eliza's story reached its triumphant conclusion. From a widow cursed by the town to a woman embraced by love, respect, and community, she had found her place in the world. Her heart was full, her life was meaningful, and her spirit was unbreakable. She had not only survived but thrived, proving that courage, kindness, and faith in oneself could overcome even the deepest sorrow. In the warmth of the summer sun, with Daniel by her side and the town slowly embracing her as one of their own, Eliza smiled. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly at home, loved, respected, and finally free to live a life filled with hope, joy, and endless possibilities.